Don't get me wrong. I will Hatfield McCoy it in a second. I don't think the first year that everybody's getting into this, they need to see that there's kind of shenanigans going on between two farms. But
So that's Tom Colton. He's a hemp farmer from West Hempfield Township, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and he's concerned that his CBD operation is going to get accidentally pollinated by the fiber and seed crops that are growing at the Penn State Research Farm, which is less than 5 miles away from his place. His concerns are legitimate, and they raise an issue that's going to have to be dealt with here in Pennsylvania sooner than later. This is the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast. I am Eric Herlock, and on today's show, we talk to Tom, get his side of the story, and then we'll talk to the director of the Penn State Research Farm, Dr. Alyssa Collins, and get her perspective. But before we get into all that, we're going to check in with the farmer that we first met on episode 28.
Hey, this is Josh Leidhecker from Susquehanna Hemp Company up here in Muncy, Pennsylvania.
Hey, Josh. Welcome back to the show. So tell us what's going on up there.
Okay, well, we've got just about all of our stuff has been planted. We are still planting the last farm of, we're planting our CBD mothers, the mothers that we took our clonings, our cuttings and clones from.
Okay.
We're actually we had too many of them. We're going to put them out in the field, and they're already enormous, so I'm not sure how that's going to go. But, I don't have the room to put them through I was going to take some and put them in our trailer here. We've got a grow trailer on this site, and it's going to be easy for me to, change the light phase and force them into production. But I can only fit 10 plants in that trailer. So we took the rest of our clones out. They're going to get planted. I was going to plant them today, but it's raining pretty good now, so maybe I won't.
So how many acres you growing?
So we've got 140 acres on my permit. Now I've got a lot of joint ventures going on with some other people, and maybe it's more than that, because I've got 87 acres of hemp and grain varieties out, and then personally I have 2 acres of CBD. Total CBD is 10.5, but I've partnered with, some Amish guys. I've partnered with some Mennonite tobacco growers, some people with produce experience, that sort of thing.
Okay.
So they're under my permit, but it's just under a kind of a joint venture arrangement.
Right. So any surprises this year, something you run into that you didn't expect?
The whole thing is a surprise. This industry changes every moment. And we're learning, just knowing what we know today from just even 3 months ago is just absolutely phenomenal. Figuring out what, where do we set up to clone, we had seed starts, we had to learn about, the needs of little baby plants versus big plants and struggles. But we got it done though. We set out a goal to do a certain thing, and we made that goal, which is pretty good. We found that I planted some hemp on some heavier ground. That did not do very well at all.
What, some heavy clay, that sort of thing?
Yeah, clay ground that it's still too wet to plant up there. We planted kind of in between storms, and it was questionable, but I've done that with other crops that have pushed through, and whatnot. This did not. So we did have a little bit of a 15-acre field fail.
Oh, no.
That farm was not one of my best farms. It's I was thinking about dropping that ground anyways. And, with the fiber contract and whatnot, I thought, well, let's give this a shot. If we have a dry year, it's going to perform better than other ground, and, but it didn't come. So kind of not the best scenario, I suppose.
So what'd you learn this year that's definitely going to help you out for next year?
Proper field selection, proper timing, upfront nitrogen for sure. Organic nitrogen source. You can see where I had chicken litter on the one farm delivered in the middle of this farm road. And the response on both sides of that, where that pile was 3 years ago in the hemp, was dramatic, absolutely dramatic. So one thing for sure is it's not like other crops where you can come in and, spoon feed it afterwards, top dress it, side dress it, whatever. I think it's best to have all your fertility in the ground right up front. And I would say like an application of manure the year, like several months before, I think would be the better solution for growing these fiber and grain varieties.
Okay.
So they're not like some of like our corn varieties have been, bred to be able to be spoon fed, where I think this is an older thing, and it's just not, you need to have your soil up to spec for sure.
If you were a first-time hemp grower looking to get into it next year, what would you be doing this fall to prep your fields?
Probably checking pH and then coming across there with some fertility. Like I think I'd be putting 2 or 3 tons of chicken litter down per acre. Okay. I would probably incorporate that so it wouldn't volatilize, just in the top, like a minimal till sort of pass. I'd also lime at the same time if I needed to adjust the pH. And I think I would do some sort of a beneficial cover crop for sure, like ryegrass mixed with some sort of either vetch or some nitrogen,
some kind of legume.
Yeah, something, because you've got enough time to actually get some measurable, growth on those crops in the springtime.
Right.
So I think, and this would be true for both CBD or grain fiber. I think I would probably I'd incorporate those natural nitrogen sources. I'd do some sort of grass, either a rye or a wheat that would suck that nitrogen up and hold it, and then we could terminate that in the springtime and plant into it, and then just the nitrogen sourcing of something that's easily killed in the spring, which would be not necessarily clover, although I do have a farm. I did a video I put on Facebook where actually I was kind of amazed. Like clover it's a little hard to kill. Like usually one pass of Roundup won't kill it. So when I seeded it, it was full like white clover in the field. All the rest of the weeds had died because I sprayed them with Roundup and glyphosate. Yeah. And I know you're probably talking to all kinds of people that are absolutely doing no herbicide passes at all, but
well, takes all kinds to make a world, as they say.
Yeah, all kinds, right?
So what were you planting into the clover with? Some kind of drill?
Yeah, I used my corn planter. I actually used I have a 15-inch on center Kinsey planter.
Okay.
I plant everything with that. I do, small grains. I do wheat, rye, barley, canola, everything. I plant everything with a planter. Yeah, I got big no-till coulters on the front, and it does a really, really nice job generally through whatever residue is there.
So getting back to pH, what are they looking for? On the acidic side, neutral? Where is it?
Like 6.6, I think is kind of where, like we kind of teamed up with one of these guys growing CBD in New York, and he was talking about like being really specific on indoor growing, where you want to range from like 6.4 to 6.9 and kind of play with that because the plant's going to take up different nutrients at different pH zones. So 6.6 was kind of like the middle of the ground sort of
right
concept.
So you were talking about planting mothers versus clones. Do you see any real advantage one way or the other? I heard one guy talking about how the plant will develop a better taproot if it's direct seeded. You think there's anything to that?
I think we're seeing a better like initial mortality, vitality in the field with a with a clone instead of with a seed start. We did seed starts as well. Like we bought 12,000 seeds from Colorado and planted them in the greenhouse and transplanted a lot of them. And really, some of those really had a tough time getting into the field. We had to play around with light. They were much more sensitive to the distance of the light to the seed bed, when you started them. If there wasn't enough light or the light was too far away, they got really leggy, which made them really hard to kind of survivability in the field. Now, that being said, the ones that did survive are really taking off now. They're doing really super well. But like when we would do, like I had one Amish grower plant 1,400 of our one variety of clones and only lost one plant.
Whoa.
And he really didn't spend a lot of time planting them. I guess the guy who runs my greenhouse went up and saw it right after he planted them, and they were all kind of laying all over the place. They weren't straight up and down. They weren't all situated in the spot the right way, but they were in the ground. And he went away, like that Amish guy, it was a farm away from his main farm.
Yeah.
Went away for 11 days, came back, and he called me. He was so excited about how these things had 5 times the size of what they got in, 10 days or something like that. It was crazy, the growth. Now, I was up to that farm, and now the seed starts are catching up to the clone starts. I don't know there's one right way, to be honest with you. I think there's something to be said for some uniformity in the clones and probably a better chance to not have, that oddball male plant show up.
Yeah, sure.
But I think it's a little bit of both. I think you got to kind of hedge your bet with taking several different approaches on planting that stuff.
All right, good advice. So when are you going to start harvesting?
Well, our plan here is we've got we're going to pull a bunk cover over our greenhouse and flush out some of our male plants or female plants. Like go ahead and phase them to put them into production, and I'm going to do the same thing up here. So I expect a CBD, harvest, I guess if you will, on a very small scale, in about 45 days. And then our outside stuff, I don't really know. I mean, this is all new for almost everybody. I've heard October. I've heard late September. I mean, I think it all depends on, when they start production. We're starting to see some of the plants showing the flowers already. And I guess some of these varieties will do that. They're not in full reproductive mode yet, but you can definitely know that they're females instead of males at this point. Our one Amish guy called, and it was a couple of his clones. He sent me some pictures, but they were clearly starting to show their sex at that point, which was kind of interesting in a way. He was all worried that they were something else. But yeah, it's just learning, what these plants need, and it's not exactly easy. There's all kinds of stuff that's popping up, and we're learning from, and pretty excited to kind of go there. And originally I wasn't interested in extraction, but we are. I think we're gonna add that piece to our business model here, is put a CBD extraction plant in here.
So what's the motivation behind that? Simply because it's a high value product?
Well, yeah. I mean, you can anytime you can go further down the pipeline and finish product, I think is beneficial to a farmer. So yeah, from biomass, which very, very profitable, just selling biomass, to distillate. And then we, of course, have our own brand of CBD that we sell that has really kind of exponentially exploded. And so we have one further step. I don't think that we're going to be able to consume all of our acres into our own brand, but anytime you can push that product down the level, is beneficial. And so we're looking at building a plant that's going to be capable of handling our 12 acres. But then I've got a couple other friends that we may take to their farm and process their stuff for them. The guys in New York had asked me about it. A couple guys downstate have asked me about it. And I'm not looking at a really huge plant, because then that kind of puts you in a different place. Then you're running around trying to buy biomass. I'm not really interested in that. But I am interested in at least taking our own biomass and taking it down the further finishing line,
Okay. So on your fiber crop, did you contract with Groff North America down there in York? What's the story on your fiber?
Yeah. We contracted, I guess all total, I have 140 acres with them under contract. And that's not all on my farm. I have a friend in Lewisburg that's growing some as well under my permit. And in both, that's super exciting to me. I mean, that's the sort of approachable production system that I think, as long as these markets come through and make sense, and I don't know, they were pretty aggressive on this first pass of their contract, trying to get people involved. And I think it may be not quite as lucrative next year if they do it again. I'm sure they will do it again. But that whole thing is more exciting to me than any of the other parts of this hemp industry. We should soon, like we've got fiber hemp that's 5-6 feet high now. The genetics we planted are not the super tall kind. I mean, I've heard of some that's 16, 18 feet, but I'm going to look for those genetics next year for sure. But this year we went with some genetics from what is that? It's Hemp Genetics International or Hemp Genetics up in Manitoba.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a variety that's done very well for them up there with their shorter growing season, and I've grown it 2 years in a row now. So I don't know. We'll see how it goes this year, but yeah, we're pretty excited about that, and I don't think we're too far away from harvesting. And they're talking like 70 days from planting to harvest.
All right, Josh Leidhecker from Susquehanna Hemp Company in Muncy, Pennsylvania. All right, next up is Tom Colton, who's got some pollination issues. Tom, what's your issue?
My issue is pollen from male plants being transferred onto my all-female plants that we have here on the farm. Penn State's within what we call the danger zone. That's under 5 miles from my farm. The word on the street is anything under 10 miles under favorable conditions is kind of in pollinatable range. It can travel further in like desert climates like Colorado where it's flat and arid. Here it's a lot of fields separating us, so I'm not as worried now. But my concern peaked recently when I found out that there was a farm growing close to me, which is the Penn State Research Farm, and they were growing a mix of male and female, open population, fiber and seed varieties. My concern was one for my own farm, but also for other farmers within the area who this is their first go around, and they're not. They fully don't understand that their crops could be compromised by pollen if they are growing feminized plants.
All right, but you seemed really agitated last week.
I was incredibly agitated, just because there was no diligence done by the state. There was no. I mean, they put out a list of growers, so the work is kind of on us to. It was just, I felt like the seriousness and the gravity of the situation was not being paid attention to by the people that need to pay attention to this stuff. They kind of put it on put the onus on the growers to kind of police ourselves on this, and we have enough to do in this burgeoning industry. I mean, we are farming.
And what's the solution then?
I think a pinning system, like a digital pinning system, would be the way to go for us. Also, for the plain sect community who don't use those kind of devices and applications, there would be paper copies that they would have available for them as well. And I think that would just encourage more dialogue between neighbors and between the fiber and seed community and the CBD flower community.
So is this a regulatory solution, or is this just neighbors talking to each other sort of solution?
I think there needs to be regulatory. I don't think we can rely on just the state of the world we are now. Sorry to say, I don't think we can rely on just neighbors, and especially in a rural community. I mean, the grows are really spread out sometimes, but here they're really consolidated in the county. It's funny to say, this part of Lancaster County where hemp was traditionally grown, there's only a few grows actually in hemp field.
And so can we talk about the letter that you sent to Dr. Collins a couple of weeks ago about your concerns?
Absolutely. Yeah, I said, if I do get pollinated, I'm going to employ technology to trace back the source of pollen, and I'm going to find out who did it, and I'm going to file suits to I feel like it would that's not my style at all, but as a small farmer and my small organic farmer that has farmed his whole career, having to dodge pollen from corn in order for me to grow my open pollinated non-GMO field corn, when we're actually allowed to grow a plant that we were equally as passionate about, and then we have to find out that we actually have to jump through these hoops again. But the financial hit that we could take on being pollinated was way more than if like our corn would cross. You know, you lose $1,000 at the mill, that's one thing, but you lose $250,000 at the processor, there goes your farm real fast. And for us, we were kind of out in front of that, and that's why I made the decision to just send them an email and be like, look, you know, I'm not, my initial idea, and I mean, I can, you know, I have a Krone forage chopper, and I told them, if you guys keep this up, I'm just going to fire it up and roll over there and mow your whole crop. But, you know, in further analysis of my own self, that's just not my style. I'm trying to be a team player in all this. So I was letting my emotion kind of get a hold of me, but at the same time, I'm very passionate about this plant, so I'm not going to be too hard on myself for throwing out stuff like that. When you've kind of had your back against the wall your whole career and just kind of felt like you were fighting an uphill battle all the time, those frustrations are, you know, you're going to have them. I mean, farming's frustrating as it is, but when you just have to constantly lie down and just feel like you're having to jump through hoops just to make your farm work for things that could be solved in a more, I don't know, streamlined manner. You know, we've kind of gotten it worked out around here. At least these guys and I talk when we were planting corn. So, like, these 3 situations of corn around you were all planted in different times within pollinatable range around all this. So just imagine trying to add that to weather patterns and things like that. It's ridiculous for us to have to think about what we do. So, and I was very cognizant about this because the pollen is so light with hemp. The pollen is so light and airy with cannabis that it will travel.
But you're less concerned about it now. It seems like you've come back from the edge a little bit.
Yes, from what I hear and from folks that have seen the trials over there, and also I had walked the 4.2 miles, which it is between me and Penn State. I walked it the other day, and I kind of took notice. Like, you can see it in the car, but I really took notice of the lay of the land and all the wind breaks and field breaks and how much corn and how much big stuff was in between to kind of catch something like that. And from what I hear of them getting a late start and they're smaller plants and just it's a low population, I'm not as concerned, you know. And I'm not going to I'm not going to go back in time and say maybe I was overreacting, because I don't feel like I was, because my passion is there to help the other growers in this time. And it's something we really need to pay attention for in the future. I would actually consider moving if they don't figure something out. I would definitely move my operations to a more secure area.
That's great that you have that ability to do that.
Yeah, but
farmers don't.
absolutely no. The only reason I'm able to do that is just because we've been here forever, and I could trade, which we've done before with other crops, just trade off, because if you run out of room and it's like, I can't grow corn here this year.
So advice for other farmers who might be in the same situation, you know, facing threat from pollination from other farms. What can you say to them?
Well, don't freak out and call your neighbor and be like, I'm going to sue you, because it's not like the best course of action. But when you're working 16, 18 hours, 20 hours a day, 7 days a week like we are, sometimes, you know, you are not thinking the straightest. But I'm not going to go back on it. I feel confident that if that does happen, we're going to definitely employ that, just because we do have to put a line in the sand. I don't think it's going to happen at all. Everything that's around us is mapped. So if there's some rogue grower, which I've heard of, you know, somebody that might have not got their permit in that didn't know you need a permit or something, but I haven't seen any of those around. So I'm confident. I'm not going to lose sleep over this anymore, which I was losing sleep over.
Okay, so what questions would you have for Dr. Alyssa Collins and the Penn State Hemp Research Program?
For the future, would you be willing to sit down and talk about, you know, if you guys are going to plant over an acre, maybe discuss when you want to plant it and things like that? I mean, I know that they weren't aware of our activities, but we were well aware of theirs. It to the point where we were trying to figure out when they were going to plant, and I just didn't have that relationship with them. Maybe now that we kind of broke the ice in this weird informal manner, that they'll be willing to like share that information with us. I understand that they're dabbling their feet into the CBD world a little bit, which is encouraging. Yeah, I'm always willing to like partnerships and good neighborly, bro downs, but at the same time, it's always nice to kind of know what's going on in your backyard a little bit. If it's danger to what's going on, it is a danger. You could lose your whole crop to something that was easily avoided just by like open communication or a more sophisticated system, which I really believe we're headed there. I don't know if the state is there, but I know through discussion that there's several avenues that we could go down to make something like that happen. That necessarily they're not state run, but I think with using the state's information, we could assemble some sort of like a pinning system for the future, at least, hopefully for next year. I mean, definitely for next year.
All right, let me see that. Yeah. So here's an idea, and maybe if someone out there listening has the the tech savvy to put together some kind of open source interactive mapping system where farmers could go and enter their coordinates and what they're growing, and then we could sort of build a statewide database and everybody could see where everyone else is growing. Anybody out there want to do that? Get in touch. I want to hear about it. All right, so any other questions for Dr. Collins? Because we're going to talk to her.
Oh, great. What was Dr. Collins' plan of action if pollen from her or their farm pollinated another farm? How were they anticipating on navigating after that, or were they even thinking about that? The only reason I even brought up the legal situation is because my lawyer advised me to it, that it was an option, and it's probably my only option for me to stay out of jail because he told me, you're screwing with a entity like Penn State. They're going to want you locked up for like trespassing and all that fun stuff. So instead of me, taking the skateboarder route, I'm going to, I'm going to put my, don't get me wrong, I will Hatfield McCoy it in a second. I don't think the first year that everybody's getting into this, they need to see that there's kind of shenanigans going on between two farms. But if something doesn't resolve itself, those situations will arise somewhere. I mean, they've happened all over the place out west, and you just don't want to see them get to the point like the dicamba situations where, they end pretty great. They've ended gravely. And when you got a lot of passion and you got a lot of people that are stretched real thin, these situations happen before you know it. And I'm not saying that would happen between me and Penn State, but like it's just not set up like that. But you get two farmers that are bullheaded and don't want to back down. That very well could happen. And nobody wants to see that happen around cannabis. That cannabis brings people together. It doesn't drive people apart.
Tom Colton, thank you.
Thanks for your time, Eric.
So, in the spirit of what Tom just said about cannabis bringing people together, here is Dr. Alyssa Collins, the director of Penn State's Southeast Agricultural Research and Extension Center.
Hi, how are you doing, Eric?
I'm doing okay. How about you?
Good. It's so much cooler now. I'm so happy.
Yeah, how about it? All right, so first, can you explain what this whole accidental pollination situation is about for listeners who may not fully understand what the issue is?
Mm-hmm. So for CBD production, similar to marijuana production, we're looking for high levels of certain chemicals in the plant. So in the case of medical marijuana production, it's usually THC, which is psychoactive, and CBD, which is the other compound that we talk about when we're producing industrial hemp, specifically for CBD. So in these two crops, there are similar issues. So when growers are producing a CBD crop outside, There is the challenge that's presented by growing anything outside, which is maybe it will get pollinated by pollen that's floating through the air. Now, in the case of both THC and CBD, the levels of these phytochemicals tend to drop once the plant's been pollinated. And so this presents a challenge of how do we keep these plants from being pollinated so that we can maintain high levels of these compounds that we want in the plants, because these are the compounds that are really valuable and will be, the goal of production. So that is sort of a universal thing, right? They've been dealing with the issue of accidental pollination in Oregon and Kentucky and a few other states for a while now, where they've been growing outdoor CBD. And they've also been struggling with it for a long time in medical marijuana production, because even when we grow indoors, there is a chance of getting pollen inside from outdoor production or even from other male plants that might be in that house that are not supposed to be there. So we're trying to avoid pollination of CBD plants whenever possible so that we can maintain high levels of the important compounds that we want.
So you mentioned the states out west. Do you know how they have been dealing with it? Is there policy in place, or what's the solution?
So some states have imposed certain restrictions against growing industrial hemp in particular counties. Oregon, I think, is one of these states. In Nevada, I've just learned that they say you can't be growing any hemp crop within 5 miles of another hemp crop. So they've decided 5 miles is the buffer that they want between hemp crops. There are articles in the industry that say, oh, we should really be doing 10 miles. There are other folks who say, oh, it's much less than that, maybe 3 or 1 mile. But right now we don't have a lot of data to give us a good answer on that. And a few universities are working on that problem right now to find out, okay, if we have a crop that's pollinating here in this area, how far will that pollen travel? And what is the likelihood of a nearby crop getting pollinated by it?
Now, is there any way for a hemp grower to know who's in their area growing other crops?
It depends on the state. In Pennsylvania, that's kind of challenging because the permitting system does ask that you provide information on where you plan to grow this crop. However, it doesn't get reported back to the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture until you've already planted. So because of the permitting system, the requirement is, yes, you have to tell us where you put this crop, but within 10 days of you having planted this crop. And so it's hard to know ahead of time. Also, I'm not sure if they're making that information public, and if so, when they're going to be making that public. So that's a real challenge here, because in order to make a good choice, you'd like to grow as far away as possible, if you're a CBD grower, as far away as possible from another hemp grower, but you don't really get to know where your nearest hemp grower is until it's a bit too late. So right now, we basically have to talk to each other and find out, hey, are you growing hemp? Or I heard you're growing hemp, and sort of a grapevine type of knowledge transfer there.
That seems like a great responsibility for the farmers. Do you think the onus should be on the state to provide more details?
Well, it would certainly be helpful. They were never secretive about the fact that they were not asking for certain information this year. So in the permitting process, you don't have to say, I'm growing CBD hemp or I'm growing fiber hemp. And so I know that they want to not put a lot of onerous paperwork on the farmer who's applying for the permit. So they specifically did not ask for a whole lot of information, but we're starting to learn now that some additional information would really be helpful to everyone growing. And if they have the means to do that, maybe they'll choose to do that in the future.
Did Penn State have a plan in place just in case they accidentally pollinated a neighboring farm? Was that even something that was considered?
Well, we weren't really thinking someone would choose to do CBD without knowing the risks involved. So as we talk to growers who are interested in growing CBD, we are very clear to make sure that they know that this and a lot of other things are a risk in choosing to take on this crop. So, much like in organic agriculture, the impetus is on the organic grower to protect their crop from pollination. It would be really, really difficult for us to ask fiber and grain industrial hemp growers to somehow trap their pollen or do something on a scale of 50 or 100 acres that would prevent their plants from pollinating. And so because of that, it's probably going to be easier and more effective for a CBD grower to protect their plants. So there's a few ways that they might be able to consider doing that. One is to grow inside a structure, not necessarily a full-blown greenhouse, rather, but one that is maybe a high tunnel. That's a cheaper structure and can be screened with a fairly fine mesh screen. Another is to, choose those grow locations very carefully based on who you've talked to, who you already know around you is growing industrial hemp. So because of the way that the winds blow, most folks know where their winds are coming from. And so those are the areas they would want to focus on, communicating with farmers upwind of them to see what they're planting, how much of it, and when they might be planting. It might be that we can work with each other and figure out certain times that we can plant. So if a CBD grower is planting their crop, it might be a shorter crop than, say, a grain or a fiber crop. And so maybe the pollination will be done and out of the way for the fiber crop before the CBD crop is flowering if we time planting right. So there are some potential solutions, but we have so little data that we don't know what's going to be effective yet. So right now we're all basically brainstorming together.
Okay. So I know you can't really talk about the situation with Tom Colton, but he, obviously he has concern for his farm and other CBD growers nearby who might not be aware of the risk with the accidental pollination. But I get the sense from what you just said that, yes, you would be willing to sit down and talk with local farmers and figure this stuff out, in the beginning of the season next year?
Certainly. Yeah, we, as, an extension and a land-grant institution, we're very invested in making sure that everyone knows the risks of this crop and that we work together to find out what the best management practices are going to be. That's kind of why we exist. So this is something that's clearly, a potential issue all across the Commonwealth, and we'd really like to figure out some solutions together to find out what we can do all as a group.
Because we want to avoid the Hatfield and McCoy situation, right?
That's right. And there's real potential for that, if we don't have great communication or if we just get caught by surprise. Mm-hmm. A lot of growers who are doing especially CBD hemp have not been farmers before.
Right.
And so there's a lot of things that they're not aware of. They're learning how to grow plants and they're learning the ins and outs of plant biology. And even farmers who have been farmers in the past are learning this new crop, which is different than a lot of other crops.
Sure.
We don't really have to deal with risk of pollination or having male and female plants and specialized time of flowering in other crops. Most of the other things we grow, we want to get pollinated.
Right.
So that's not a concern for us.
So what role does government play in the solution here?
So one of the things we might consider moving forward from the perspective of regulation and policy is, what are the things that are not very invasive that we can do to facilitate everyone growing this crop? Because We don't want to infringe upon the ability of fiber and grain growers, right? But we also don't want to infringe upon the ability of CBD growers to grow their crops. So what things can we do without getting to restrictions to make things better? And maybe that does involve gathering more information and making more of it available to one another so that we can make really informed decisions about the timing of growth and where we locate our grow locations and what sort of measures we put into place to protect our crops.
All right, Dr. Alyssa Collins from Penn State. So you probably noticed that both Tom and Alyssa are looking to the state for some more guidance here. So I reached out to the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture for comment, and in return they sent me a paragraph about cross-pollination from the program parameters published on their website, which I will read to you now. It says, because industrial hemp pollen could potentially contaminate both medical marijuana crops and other industrial hemp plantings, PDA will not approve planting hemp crops within 3 miles of an approved medical marijuana growing facility and does not recommend planting within 3 miles of a planting for CBD or certified seed. Growers should be aware that doing such could lead to legal challenges from existing growers. Okay, I guess I was hoping for more than that, and maybe we'll get something more substantial for a future episode. All right, last week I mentioned that I was trying to bring in a cannabis lawyer from out west, and I have not been able to schedule that lawyer yet, so also look for that in a future episode, because I would love to hear how a more mature hemp region has solved or not solved these issues. If you've got thoughts on this issue, either in Pennsylvania or elsewhere, please send me an email. I would love to get your perspective. podcast@lancasterfarming.com. All right, and just another reminder about the 2019 Pennsylvania Hemp Summit that's taking place in Lancaster, Pennsylvania on October 7th and 8th. More information and registration information at teampa.com/PA Hemp Summit. We will be taping an episode of this podcast from the reception there on Monday, October 7th. So that's going to be interesting because, usually I do this podcast by myself. So having an audience will be something completely different. But echoing what Tom Colton said, this plant brings people together, and I hope it brings all of us together in Lancaster on October 7th and 8th. All right, so that does it for me. My name is Eric Herlock. I'm the digital editor at Lancaster Farming, which is, as I've mentioned before, the best agricultural newspaper in the world. Don't believe me? Go pick up a copy. Better yet, subscribe. You can go to lancasterfarming.com/podcast deal. Get a subscription. All right, thanks again for listening to today's show. And until next time, I'll see you in the funny papers. No, wait, that's not right. Maybe you won't see me at all. Maybe I'm just a disembodied voice. I don't know. All right, until next time, I'll see you in the newspaper.
Industrial hemp.
This episode of the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast is copyright 2019 by Lancaster Farming. Lancaster Farming is part of the Steinman Communications family. Today's show was written and recorded, edited and produced by Eric Herlock. All music is courtesy of Tin Bird Shadow.
Industrial hemp.